Let's talk about Arnold Rothstein. Rothstein was, they say, the man who organized crime in America. It's pretty much true. He built the foundation for organized crime as we know it. Not the mafia, but the syndicate, American organized crime. He was born in 1882 to a Jewish Orthodox home. He died November 4, 1928. He lived at 912 Fifth Avenue. He was called AR, Mr. Big, the Fixer, the Bankroll, the Big Bankroll, the Man Uptown, the Brain. How much of that is newspaper and how much is factual? Rothstein had a pedigree and the wherewithal to become much more than just a common criminal, which, despite his underworld status, when he died, that's all he was, just another criminal. He died in the gutter. Rothstein was one of the early builders of organized crime in America. He would graduate a series of underlings into mobdom: Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Legs Diamond, Frank Erickson, Bugsy, Seigel, Luciano. Luciano said, he taught me how to dress, how to use knives and forks and all the things like that at a dinner table, about holding a door for a girl. If Arnold had lived a little longer, he could have made me pretty elegant. Now, that's from the supposed autobiography of Luciano, and every time I quote that, I wonder why the hell I did it. There's some doubt about the origins of that book. The author may have just sat in a corner and wrote it without Luciano being involved. Anyway, he was born in Manhattan. We're talking about Rothstein now, in an Orthodox, a Jewish Orthodox home. His older brother would study to be a rabbi. Regardless, in his teens, Rothstein was already a pool hustler, a small-time gambler. By the 1900s, Rothstein's thugs like Monk Eastman were collecting his loans made throughout the Tenderloin district, uh, downtown Manhattan, what would have been downtown Manhattan. He also financed bucket shop operators. Those are con men like the notorious Jake Factor, brother of the cosmetic king Max Factor, who ran a phony Wall Street investment firm. Rothstein was also invested in heroin, prostitution, white slavery, horse fixing. He was big in dope and heroin. They just kind of overlook it in him. They being historians, they just kind of overlook it. But he financed dope deals from Europe into the U.S. It was rumored, but probably not true, that Rothstein had fixed the 1919 World Series. After that, he was America's favorite gangster. The newspapers took him and ran with him. They called him Mr. Broadway. He kept his own booth at Lindy's restaurant in Manhattan. Lindy's was the in place. F. Scott Fitzgerald, based his character Meyer Wolfsheim in The Great Gatsby on Rothstein. The character Nathan Detroit in Guys and Dolls was also a send-off of Rothstein. The bulk of Rothstein's success was due to his partnership with the outrageous Tammany Hall boss Big Tim Sullivan, who took care of Rothstein's police and political protection matters for money, for a lot of money. When Prohibition started, Rothstein underwrote a variety of bootleggers, including Luciano, as he said, Costello, Diamond, Buckhalter, Masseria, Sierra Terry Nova. He financed narcotic shipments from Asia, as I think I just said. Waxy Gordon, a thug from New York's Lower East Side, was one of his many bootleggers that Rothstein put into business, along with Maxie Greenberg. Big Maxie Greenberg, they killed him in 1933, was this double-dealing guy. Willie Egan of Egan's Rats had pushed Greenberg and his brother out of St. Louis and into Detroit, Michigan, where he had started smuggling whiskey into the United States from Canada. And he made incredible returns on his small investment. Prior to that, Greenberg was in charge of purchasing Sacramento wine on behalf of Detroit's rabbis, which allowed him a way around the prohibition laws. Greenberg was a bank robber, railroad thief, sold most of the wine to resellers in St. Louis and Kansas City, the ones he was supposed to be selling to the rabbis. Realizing that he could become a millionaire within a year by bringing thousands of gallons of whiskey and wine over the border, as opposed to several hundred bottles of weak wine here and there, Greenberg traveled to New York, and working through Waxy Gordon, he had worked in the garment district business for Rosenthal, set up a meeting with Rosenthal in Central Park. There, sitting on a park bench, Greenberg, who had once gotten a presidential pardon from Woodrow Wilson, made his pitch to Rothstein for a loan of just under $200,000. I paused because I've written a long piece on presidential pardons and gangsters. It's mind-boggling that it goes on, but it does. I'll read it to you one of these days. Rothstein said he would think about it, and he told Gordon and Greenberg to come to his office that next afternoon. Rothstein said he would underwrite Greenberg later, but he wanted him and Gordon to work on bringing the shipments from Europe to New York, where the demand for liquor was tenfold over Detroit. Greenberg and Gordon agreed to build a fleet of boats and handle the imports, while Rothstein would handle the finance and the protection. While Greenberg and Gordon didn't know, what they didn't know was that Rothstein was using it to build a much bigger picture. He was always a step ahead. Rothstein understood that prohibition would not last, but the need for stolen diamonds from Africa, heroin from Asia, would boom in the future. That was the real organization Gordon and Greenberg set up for Rothstein. They realized it later on. At the time, they didn't. By 1929, Gordon and Greenberg were rich and very successful in what they did. They owned about 20 breweries. They ran beer from Manhattan to Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, North Maryland. And then on April 12, 1933, Frankie Carbo, a professional killer, aside from everything he said he was, a boxing manager, he was a killer, murdered Greenberg inside the Carteret Hotel in Elizabeth, New Jersey. There's a tape on here about that. Meyer Lansky, Joe Adonis, and Abe Zwillman had ordered the shooting. Unlike Waxy Gordon, who was still willing to incorporate himself into the new national syndicate, Greenberg had refused. He held out. He didn't see the future in front of him. On September 8, 1928, George McManus, he was a character. He was a connected bootlegger, he was a bookmaker, rather, I'm sorry, he was a gambler. He called together this high-stakes poker game at a gambling house, probably run by a hood named Dolly Riley. The game ended 2 days later on the 10th, and when it was over, Rothstein had lost a small fortune, about $300,000. Think about how much money that was at the time, to several of the gamblers at the table, but he didn't pay. Instead, when the game was over, Rothstein walked out of the room and went home. Bad thing to do in that crowd. A full week passed before Rothstein, he still hadn't paid his debt. Instead, he started to spread rumors that the game was fixed against him, it was a setup, blah, blah, blah. George McManus had put the game together, and he hosted it, and the winners went to him and pressured him to get Rothstein to pay up. In their view, he lost fair and square. Rothstein, he was a really sharp guy, especially in matters of gambling. I doubt that he was used as a pigeon. I just don't think so. He was too smart for that. He just lost. When Rothstein wouldn't cooperate with McManus called Jimmy Hines. Jimmy Hines was a Tammany Hall hack, but he was also powerful. Uh, Tammany Hall hack. But he was also a friend of Rothstein's. On Sunday night, November 4th, George McManus called Rothstein to room 349 at the Park Central Hotel. Later, that Park Central is where Albert Anastasia got hit in the hit. Why am I talking like he got shot and killed at the barber shop down in the basement when the last I saw it, it was a Starbucks coffee thing. He asked Rothstein as quick as he could. Rothstein took the call at his booth at Lindy's, then located on 49th and Broadway, where he was meeting with Jimmy Meehan, who ran the Park City Club, one of the city's biggest gambling dens in the 20s. Rothstein had bankrolled the club. After he hung up from McManus, asking him to come to room 340, whatever it was, Rothstein told Meehan to walk outside with him. McManus wants to see me at Park Central, he told the gambler. Then he handed him a pistol from his coat and said, "Keep this for me, I'll be right back." And at that, Rothstein walked up 7th Avenue to the Park Sheraton Hotel. No one really knows what happened next, but it's probable that when Rothstein arrived, McManus may have been drunk. There were words exchanged and a shot was fired. There was no witness. Perhaps the gamblers who were owed $300,000 offered McManus a cut if he could collect the money from Rothstein. The fact that McManus was probably drunk didn't help. Another theory is that McManus had lured Rothstein into the room where the robbers or perhaps a kidnapper were waiting. Rothstein probably resisted, in this theory, the attack, and Rothstein was shot once in the lower abdomen on his way out, perhaps. but he was shot in the lower abdomen. Several minutes later, Rothstein stumbled down the service stairs. He's holding his stomach, and he asked for help. He asked somebody to fetch him a cab. Police were called, and Rothstein was taken to New York's Polyclinic Hospital. Rothstein had sustained tremendous internal bleeding, and he quickly fell into a coma. He regained consciousness for a while. When they asked him, "Who shot you?" he said, "I'll take care of it myself." He died the following morning, Election Day, November 6, 1928. Rothstein had bet heavily on the election that year. Had he lived, he'd put the right bets. He would have collected $570,000. After Rothstein was shot, McManus contacted Jimmy Hines, the political bull for Tammany, who contacted Bo Weinberg, a Dutch Schultz associate, who put McManus in hiding until the matter blew over. McManus eventually turned himself over to the police, but there was no case to be made against him since there was no witnesses to the actual shooting. And Rothstein never said who shot him. The odd thing is, they're not related. I'm sure it was an accident. McManus was released on bail after his arrest. For the first time in New York County, that a murder suspect was allowed to go free, New York County being. When asked if he was in the room when Rothstein was shot, McManus replied, "I don't know. It was raining that night. Anybody got a cigarette?" The day he was released from bail, October 29, 1930, his wife was struck and killed by a car in front of their apartment at 1215 Fifth Avenue. Rothstein's estate was appraised at just over $1.7 million, $1,775,000 actually, plus another several million probably in hidden assets, several more invested in various criminal schemes and narcotics. However, Rothstein's brother declared that the estate was bankrupt and had no assets. Bankrupt in that he owed out that $1.7 million in cash that was legal. George McManus died on August 29, 1940, of a heart attack at his summer home at 209 Baltimore Avenue in Seagirt, New Jersey. Seagirt, New Jersey. Never heard of Seagirt, New Jersey. It's two words, too, Seagirt. He was only 47 years old. 300 people attended the funeral. Officially, the Rothstein murder to this day remains unsolved.